This week, David Hunt from Prelude is with us to discuss scientific approaches to security testing. Then, Jerry Bell, the man behind InfoSec's newest community water cooler, infosec.exchange, joins us to talk about the state of InfoSec culture and recent Mastodon migrations. Finally, in the enterprise security news, security funding is back, baby. Security unicorn layoffs continue, though. We talk zombie corns, IronNet struggles, Netbricks acquires Remediant. We talk breaches, LastPass, Rackspace, Okta via GitHub, Slack via GitHub. GitHub announces 2FA improvements. I wonder why. AI generates insecure code, cyber insurance challenges, and Fire Festival fraudster funding more frauds. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Bird Day. This is episode 301, recorded on Thursday, January 5th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler?
You know, Adrian, I was this close, half tempted to showing you the bird, and then I was like, no, that might be over the top.
That would have been great.
I was really going to do it. I was close.
I would appreciate it. I mean, 60% of our audience wouldn't have noticed, you know, so.
Yeah, because they would have just heard you laughing at randomness. I got you. But no, what's your favorite bird? My favorite bird is Tweety Bird from Snoopy.
My favorite bird is the grackle. If you've ever watched a grackle, they're hilarious. They're nature's stand-up comics. Yeah, look up videos of grackles. They're just absolutely
I'm rapidly
hilarious
Googling in the background for sure.
All right, Tyler, I need to call shenanigans. Did you really just call Woodstock Tweety Bird?
Damn it!
Ooh.
Oh, you are so right. You knew who I meant, but yes, you're right.
I knew what you meant. Woodstock is great.
Woodstock is who I meant.
Man.
Yes.
Oh, man. Controversy right at the beginning of the show.
Indeed, 2023 starts strong.
Let me finish the introductions here before we get into too much more. We also have the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well. I also do like Woodstock, and Woodstock is not Tweety Bird, but fun fact, depictions of birds freak me out. Real birds, okay, but depictions of birds, no. I'm just going to, get rid of the whole thing. What do you mean by depictions?
Oh, you mean like cartoon birds?
Well, pictures of birds, statues of birds. I was once at a wedding with an ice sculpture of a bird. That was the creepiest thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
Were they upset when you knocked it over?
When I kicked it and smashed it into pieces? Yeah, no. It was like also this 4-foot-high ice bird. It was so creepy.
I don't know why you would find that creepy. That's fascinating to me.
Because it was creepy. It was not as cute as Woodstock.
So the other thing I want to add to our bird discussion, because I know Goose is going to be like, we got to get to the real meat of this. But the other thing I want to add to the bird discussion is birds are not real. Does anyone recognize that meme?
I do.
Yeah, birds aren't real. It's a thing. They're actually robots installed by the U.S. government. So just remember that.
I've heard that they're cameras. Not real. What about all those dead birds that cats drag to my back door?
Fake. They're all fake. That's fake news. That's fake news.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had cats. I've had to clean up quite a few that were not quick enough to escape the orange tabby.
I feel like cats don't like me because I don't have a cat. There's a bunch of cats in the neighborhood, and they just keep. I don't know. Maybe it's a sacrifice or a gift that they think they are providing to the back of my house.
You're just giving off weird dog vibes.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely
no,
have a dog.
they do. Cats like to, they think of them as gifts, so they're trying to win you over.
It hasn't happened yet, Kat. Sorry if you're listening.
Did you think even for a moment, Adrian, that this would have been like a massive opening to the show?
No, not at all. I thought this was going to be a quick one. So I do want to give a shout out for National Bird Day to an app called Merlin, because there's a bird I actually thought were bats, because I only heard it like right at dusk, in the early evening. And I just could not figure out what these birds were. And I found this app that I think is made by a nonprofit or a university called Merlin. And you can just hit record in this app. And like in seconds, if you record a bird sound, like it's identified it right away. It's taken that recording, it's matched it to a database, and you can help, and you can help update their database with new bird sounds. And I think they can ID by photos as well. And found out it was a killdeer is the name of the bird.
So Shazam for bird noises.
Shazam for birds. Yep.
I will say that Cardinals do not like it when you replay their bird song through like a Bluetooth speaker. They get very confused.
Oh yeah. No, I've thought about that. I've wondered about messing with some birds.
Yeah, I put a Bluetooth speaker up near the roof, and they kept flying in and like dive bombing it. They did not understand who this interloper was in the neighborhood.
I bet. Oh my God, that's funny. All right, and as you've heard speaking, we also have the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf is with us as well.
Hello, all. And my favorite bird is the cassowary, because it's probably one of the closest birds to a modern day dinosaur.
Looks like it's designed to headbutt the crap out of you if you annoy it.
Yeah, and it's got sharp claws like a velociraptor, which is my favorite dinosaur. Not that you asked.
That's a pretty badass bird pick, I have to say. All right, we got a quick announcement here. You can join our Discord channel and talk about your favorite birds or dinosaurs, and you can chat with hosts, ask questions during the show, and do all kinds of fun stuff on there. You can go to securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite to our Discord server. All right, and today we are talking about not birds anymore. We're going to leave that behind. We're talking about scientific approaches to security testing. We're excited to have David Hunt, co-founder and CTO with Prelude, with us today. David has a career spanning many industries, including enterprise, aerospace, and operational technology. Prior to Prelude, he led the team that built MITRE Caldera, which if you have dived into adversary simulation or security testing at all, you're probably familiar with that project. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I am kind of in the background trying to figure out how to spell Grackle. So if anybody has that exact spelling, just shoot it over.
It's like Crackle, like the video service Crackle, but with a G.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Yep. So that's, I guess feel free to share your favorite bird if you want to do that before we move into
yes.
the interview.
Definitely. So my favorite bird is it's not going to be the most exciting, I don't think, out of today, but a cardinal, which already came up, but it's actually helpful to know that there are some tips and tricks I can use with the cardinals in my backyard to, let's say, get to know them better. So I really appreciate that call out.
What is it you like about cardinals? Is it like an aesthetic thing or something that they do?
Totally color. I love the red.
Color. Okay.
The Blue Jays are also in the list, but yeah, I love red.
Nice. Yeah, color-wise, I love eastern bluebirds, but we will move on from birds. So this is actually one of my
only if you want to.
This is actually one of my favorite topics. So I started a company back in 2017 with a good friend of mine, Kyle, and we quickly observed, like, the whole idea of the company was to reimagine consulting services if we were just going to do it from scratch. And one of the things we found is that, people just don't realize what they've gotten wrong. They don't know how to prioritize on the defense side. And a lot of our customers were small and medium-sized companies. So if they had any security staff, they had 1 to 3 security staff, so smaller companies here. And so we designed some services to help them, test their defenses, not like from a pen test perspective, but I guess from more of like a purple team, what you call a purple team perspective back then, which I think has evolved somewhat. And that's the reason, David, I wanted to have you on, is I'm very interested now that I'm seeing some companies focusing more on testing security teams and testing security environments and making sure everything works correctly. Because every time I analyze, I do like a postmortem on a breach or something like that, almost every single time there's just stuff misconfigured. People don't know how to find alerts in their environment, just basic stuff that practice and testing would fix. Is that the same thing that kind of, like maybe if you want to talk about how you got drawn into MITRE Caldera, and then maybe take us into Prelude from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think in a large way, just to touch on one of the things you were mentioning, we've been stuck in the industry for quite a while in being reactive to what's going on. So in a large way, that's centered around topics like CVEs, around patches and vulnerabilities. Something comes out, we have something very specific that comes out when a CVE number is published and released. We get a product and we have a version of that product that becomes the target. We look in our environment, we're very reactive. It takes us weeks to find and patch all of those things. Meanwhile, the rest of the environment is wide open. And so we've kind of gotten used to, in cybersecurity, to reacting, not being proactive. And testing is all about kind of moving that forward and being proactive with how you locate things, the structure and process to how you actually do that. And that's kind of the missing component that we've had for quite some time in the industry, looking back over the years. And so for me personally, I think I started to really, formulate a lot of my ideas and opinions on the matter when I was at MITRE on the Caldera project. And what brought me to MITRE originally to take on that work was the lack of efficacy in defensive products. And so what I mean by that is there's a significant amount of defensive products that exist, antivirus, EDR, WAF, there's all sorts of technologies that exist to protect us. And what we don't have are any ways to make rational decisions about which ones are working well for us, which ones are configured correctly, or in a lot of cases, which ones are even installed in the first place. So in a large environment, it can be tricky to even understand where you have coverage, even a little bit.
So when I was formerly at CRA, which owns the Security Weekly podcast, one of the things I had built was product testing. So also into questioning, like I had my suspicions, and I was trying to figure out how do we do this, in the B2B enterprise space. Like with consumer stuff, it's easy. You go to Best Buy, or Amazon or something like that. You buy a product, you test it, you review it, you publish the results. Even with a car, you can do that. But in enterprise security, getting your hands on a license for a lot of these products is not an easy task. You basically have to work with the company. They have to be comfortable with you doing the testing. And I've always had my suspicions, like, I wonder if some of these products, even when configured correctly, do they work at all? And some of my experiences doing that testing, the answer is no. Even in an ideal environment, I'm not sure some of these products really deliver, what they say they do in the box, which is important to know.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is there actually is no way at scale to understand that. And it's funny that you mentioned Best Buy, actually, because an example I like to give is this triggers all the way down from the consumer side to the enterprise side and even into the government side, which is if I walk into Best Buy today, you or I walk into Best Buy and are like, need to buy a laptop, grab one off the shelf, pick it out, and we say we want to buy an antivirus to go along with it. We as consumers, even at that level, that individual level, we have no way to determine or pick which AV that we want to use outside of things like, well, which color kind of resonates the best with me today. There isn't anything that will guide me to a rational decision.
Yeah, definitely. So, so kind of moving into, I think for me, the big question is, like, we know we have this gap here, but if you go through PCI, if you go through some of the regulations and even some of the standards we have, there's not really, like one of the things I was doing recently is putting together a cloud IR checklist. recently. And I was looking at some of the old ones that I was replacing, and none of them say anything about testing. With IR and disaster recovery and BCP and things like that, especially, it's my experience that if you haven't actually done it, you've maybe accounted for 50% of the things you need to do for it to go smoothly. And, I think that applies to security defenses as well. So how do we, aside from bringing a product to market and trying to educate people, do you see an opportunity, for compliance or regulation to come in here and say, hey, no, this is actually something that everybody should do? Or does some of that already exist and maybe I've overlooked it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that happening. So driven through policy, driven through compliance. And I think a lot of things that we've seen some evolution in this occurring with how the rapid pace to at least how public some of the attacks recently have been in the news. Ransomware attacks obviously getting quite a bit of attention. And a lot of these are taking advantage of not 0 days, things that are unknown, but taking advantage of things that are already known, things that if we had done proactive testing in certain environments, we'd be ahead of and patching and fixing issues. And so, yeah, I think a lot of these, a lot of the desire to do continuous security testing up front is going to be driven through policy and compliance.
Yeah. So we've talked about, how to convince people that this is something that they should do. And we've already seen a lot of different both open source and commercial efforts to bring this to people, to productize it. So let's kind of shift there. What is, and there's several use cases here, right? Like I often separated it into functional testing versus I forget what I called the other kind of testing, but basically the way I think of it is the control actually turned on? Is the email actually getting somewhere? So very functional testing. Is the span port is the sensor plugged into the right span port? That kind of very simple, like on off. The toaster isn't plugged in type situations. And then you have the much more difficult side of it, which is emulating adversaries and saying not only can you detect an attack, but can you detect a sneaky attack or a sneakier attack, and kind of stepping up the level of efforts there. So how do you approach that with a product and with customers? Do you separate those out into separate things, or does the adversary emulation stuff also serve as the functional testing? Is it not necessary to do them both separately?
Yeah, I think it's been an evolution actually. So the way testing has kind of evolved in the security space has included areas like penetration testing for trying to find vulnerabilities and kind of the penetration of the network, the perimeter of the network itself. Vulnerability scans have kind of dominated that space for locating things. And that's been very proactive. And then you have what you've mentioned, which is more in the red teaming space and the purple teaming space, which is, hey, I've been tasked with understanding how my network and my environment would react if this particular APT were to come in, or if this particular type of behavior were to happen in the environment. I want to know how we would react, what alerts would trigger, how our defense would actually hold up. And that's kind of the current way that a lot of modern organizations are running now, which is bring in the purple team, bring in the red team, and get them to test everything continuously, but also manually. There's a little bit of autonomy that goes in there when it comes to some systems like Caldera, for example, that can be set up. But that testing is still what I'd call almost random, which is if you're tasked with emulating a particular APT, you can get a playbook of what they're used to doing. But what you do as a purple teamer or a red teamer is you grab sort of random behaviors that they're known to do. You apply them in the network and you try to bypass your defense, but there isn't a rhyme or reason. And there's a lot of nuance between one particular command that you could run and an obfuscated version of that. So there's a lot of cat and mouse that happens in red teaming and purple teaming, which is incredibly critical, very, very important role, but it's hard to scale. So when it comes to how do you actually turn that into a product that you can actually work on scaling, get it out, make it more accessible to more people, I think you have to add a little bit of structure on top of that. And so what we've been really focused on is, can we apply what we call a rule, which is basically a surface area on a particular type of device, call it a Windows laptop or a Linux server, and say, can we define a surface area on that machine? And can we write automated tests that are targeting that particular piece of surface area for known nodes? An example of that is kind of the traditional example, which is, will my defensive product quarantine a known malicious Office macro document? And we target that test. It should catch it every single time if the defense is on and configured correctly. And you turn that test on and say, run this every single day and make sure that defense is working. And you continue to repeat that process, and you have that continuous testing running on all of your endpoints all at the same time. And that enables you to kind of get a complete coverage and get a much better idea of what's going on.
Yeah, so it's kind of a like a sanity check, like a security controls regression test, right? Like you want to make sure that, one day all of a sudden, that's something I used to do as a pen tester. I'd always turn AV back on once I was done, but I would just disable AV. Back in the days, there weren't, when I pen tested, there weren't a whole lot of tamper controls there, and you could literally just net stop AV. Do whatever you need to do and turn it back on, which, it would fail the regression testing, if I were in the middle of doing that. But is that the idea there?
That's absolutely it. Yeah. So I think the missing component that we're really trying to push on, and this has been missing in the offensive security space for quite a while, is a lot of structure on how do you actually attack the problem set, not just following an APT playbook, but an actual structure that allows you to target each component of the endpoint in a methodical, very scientific approach on how you would do that. And so I'll give it, I think one of the best examples I've seen in recent years of this, which I did a couple of years ago, which is running a continuous test on a particular Linux server that was, for the most part, air-gapped. A sysadmin came in one day and started updating packages on that machine. And in order to update packages on that particular machine, they needed to enable a proxy. So they set a proxy up from an internet-enabled server to this air-gapped server, installed their things, and then forgot to remove that proxy when they signed off for the day. And in that case, we had lateral movement tests running on that box. And just one day out of the blue, that agent that we had running the tests was capable of moving across the network through that proxy, moving from that hoping to be air-gap system onto internet-enabled devices. And that was a case of catching something within a 24-hour period that could have been caught many, many months later by an adversary.
So that's one use case, and this is I'm going to hand off to Sean. Has a couple questions as well after I clarify on this. But it seems like you've got a couple use cases here. So one is what you're describing, like ensuring your controls are working as expected. The environment is configured as expected, and there's no surprises or no regressions. But also it seems to me like a key use case here would or should be to actually test your IR team. To test your SOC, to test make sure the process part of it works, that the humans can find things in their systems when you're relying on a human to find something, and know what to do in those scenarios, know what their next step is to contain and recover and eradicate and all those fun IR steps, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that as a huge use case, especially with companies and enterprises in particular that either have SOCs or they have internal purple teams that are in charge of writing rules, Sigma rules and so forth, in order to fire off alerts. And so what we've seen is kind of people approaching security testing in order to solve one of two problems. It's either efficacy of a defensive product, whatever that may be. It could be on the network, could be on the endpoint itself, or it could be, hey, I want to test the behaviors of my response. That could be the IR team. That could be the team that's monitoring the alerts in the SOC. That could be, the user of an endpoint itself. Do they actually report something occurring? And it's kind of testing the overall response to various things occurring in real time.
Great, thank you. Sean here. So that leads directly into something I was going to ask around, does Prelude correlate the attack test to detection in the SIM to identify or associate with the activity that was performed? Or is it one of those things where it's identified and then the SOC is then doing that correlation?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both at the end of the day. And so what I mean by that is, so every time that we run an action inside of, every time we run a test, any alert that would get fired will include a tag that has our particular, tagging unit on it. So it helps you identify what's coming out of our system so you can filter and adjust to that. So that does allow you to filter or separate things coming from us from things coming from other places if you want to analyze it from that perspective. What we don't do is we don't tell you whether that alert is working or not. That's kind of up to you to analyze your own alerts and decide what's your own threshold. So the context of that alert could be incredibly important based on what it is, or it could be something that's incredibly low priority.
So along those lines, how easy would it be for an organization to identify if the appropriate event logging is not actually configured in order to detect that sort of activity? So for example, if you're leveraging, say, Windows event logging, but certain events or event categories are not configured to be logged, then would Prelude help identify that, or would it just be a blank slate for the SOC?
Now, that's actually a big advantage for running the continuous test on the endpoint. On that particular example, which is the Windows event logging, the way that we try to approach that and get people into this habit is deal with that on the endpoint itself, not within the SOC. And so the test itself has the ability to do the action as well as verify what the action's output was. So in this example, you might say, my test is to dump LSAS. And then you can say, well, what is the after effect of that? Let me check to see what Windows event logs occurred in the system and what matches the behavior, what was expected versus what was there. And let me ship that result off somewhere where it can be analyzed.
Okay, so it's not an automatic thing. It's more of a combination of what the tool is providing plus what the SOC or incident response is handling around that. Quick question about your tagging. Where does that get injected? Is that injected at the source, or is that something that can get injected as part of the SIM event forwarding flow?
Yeah. So in Operator, which is our command and control center that we have in play right now, you can inject it in two places. So you can inject it at the agent level, which is the thing running the tests in particular, or you can inject it into something that we call Outpost, which is where the agent sends the result to. And when it gets sent to that Outpost server, it's a little bit of a Python server. When that Python server accepts the output from the agent, it can then tag it before inserting it into your logging database.
Okay, cool. I've been involved in a number of Purple Team exercises over the years with different organizations of different sizes, and one of the biggest challenges often has been okay, here are the vulnerabilities or here are the weaknesses in this environment, and here's what detection saw or what event kind of came out the other side as far as what we could correlate. But the big gap often seems to be, how do we fix that and how do we prioritize it? Is there something around Prelude that helps guide the customer to an effective, feasible solution for any specific issue or set of activities?
Yeah, that's actually a really big one, which is prioritization. So you've got N number of issues. What do you fix? In what order do you fix them, and so forth? We've battled that a lot and kind of kicked that around in a variety of different contexts. So what we're leaning into right now, kind of the lessons we've learned in spending time in red and purple teaming, is we want to try to catch all of the what we call the surface area issues that are the known bads first. We want to look at the endpoint holistically and say there are 10 things that should never occur on this particular type of endpoint. We know, for taking the dumping LSAS example, nobody should ever be able to dump LSAS on this computer no matter what. That would be a no-known. We'll call that a rule. Another one that we'd take is a malicious Office macro should always be quarantined. And so we've come up with a set of these tests that are based around these known rules. And what most of our tests are circulating around right now is, can we execute tests that are known knowns, verify that your defense is actually protecting you in those cases? And if not, and hopefully this is a small percentage of issues for most people, in those cases you're not protected from those issues, go ahead and fix those as your first thing.
Okay.
So less of the nuanced like edge cases and more of the like big components.
Gotcha. So in your dumping LSAS example, obviously there's a few different ways to do it through Task Manager programmatically, which is leveraging that same method. There's a couple other methods such as Mimikatz. Settings, protected process is a way to help protect and identify when that sort of activity is occurring, including some detection and defense around that. Is Prelude looking at these different methods that attackers are using, or is it primarily a single approach to what the issue is as far as the activity that Prelude puts into it and what comes out the other side?
Yeah, this is actually where it gets a lot of fun because this comes up on purple teaming all the time. If you've been on a manual purple team assessment, which is you'll try in the dumping LSAS example, you'll say, hey, I'm going to try to do it this way. You get caught, you hop onto a different system and you try to do it a different way. And basically you're playing this cat mouse game in order to determine if you can find a way on a particular system to not get caught. And so to replicate that in a structured continuous security form that's autonomous, the way we do it is we define the rule and we say users should never be able to dump LSAS. So that's the rule. Underneath that, we develop tests. And we can have as many tests under that rule as we like that cover all the different implementations of dumping LSAS that we can think of, that we've seen in the wild, that have exploit code to them and so forth. And we allow you to schedule those tests to run on your endpoints at whatever sort of schedule that you'd like. So for example, you may say, I want to run this type of LSAS dump every day on this subset of computers. I want to run this other variation on this other subset. And you could have it kind of mix and match across your network. And what you're doing is looking for anything that triggers.
Okay, that's fair. So final question, does Prelude build on attack strategy based on what's vulnerable in the environment? So in other words, does it identify a vulnerable system and then identify what the next step could be based on that one, plus other information and knowledge about what's vulnerable in the environment, like an attacker would?
Yeah, no, we don't go that deep in that direction, I'd say. Our goal is to identify at the top level, how are your defenses protecting you against all of these different rule sets. So it's not about finding, is this device in particular vulnerable to kind of like say a CVE or something to that effect. It's more of, are your defenses protecting you against an attack that falls in the category of that CVE? So one example of that might be, actually, let's take our macro Office example again, because that I think plays well for this, which is if you look at how many CVEs are tied to malicious Office macros, you'll find quite a few. And so if your defensive system is capable of catching and responding to all of the, popular variations of macros that are found in the wild, especially ones like MSF Venom and other things that can be dropped in into the VBA scripts, then you start to say, hey, I'm actually getting some pretty good confidence that my defense can protect against this particular type of attack, which means that I feel pretty good about my coverage across, n number of CVEs and the vulnerability space or surface area of this given endpoint.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so on the topic of these tests, I think something that's interesting is how you decide to build and prioritize the tests that you guys build. Because again, it seems like talking about the cat and mouse game of evasions and things like that. All these different ways you can evade defenses and controls. How do you guys? So I guess a two-part question. How do you guys decide on what to build? Are you constantly looking at like some of the reports that come out from researchers, researching different attacker TTPs and stuff like that? Do you go look at the attack matrix? Because I think clearly that's one of those things where, I think for years what we've needed is like a heat map of the attack matrix, because like all those tests aren't important. Like there are some companies who want to test for every single item on there, but clearly some of those are more important than others. So how do you prioritize that? And then the other side of that, I think one of the tricky things in security is the idea of what I like to call red flags versus yellow flags. Things that are absolutely bad 100% of the time. It should always float to the top. You should always see this alert, versus things that are, maybe they're bad. And because we have so many of those, and I call those yellow flags, we have so many of those yellow flags, it's very easy to bury all your red flags, all your absolute super important tests in a bunch of maybe kind of important, given the context tests.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a question that could be kind of fun here. So
okay.
Could be fun, right? Is a MacBook Air or an iPad, which one is more secure?
I would say the iPad is more secure, because less opportunities for the user to act independently and grab software that's not
Absolutely.
from a tightly controlled.
Absolutely. So totally. So I'd say that is the delta that we are looking at this from just a very qualitative standpoint. So I was actually on the MITRE ATT&CK leadership team, for those that don't know, when I was on the Caldera project. And so I spent a lot of time around the matrix and kind of seeing the pros and cons there, and how does that apply to things like, the matrix, along with things like behavioral analysis and so forth. Really, really fascinating ways of classifying things. But you come up with that same problem in purple teaming, which is you've got this giant matrix. How do you decide what to do? And is something like an impact tactic more or less important than a lateral movement tactic? And that is such a contextual decision that it becomes very difficult for somebody to prioritize. Similar CVEs. How do I know this one is better than that one, for me in particular? So the way we look at it is a little bit more surface area related. So if you look at the MacBook versus an iPad, and you say, well, yeah, iPads are actually more secure than MacBooks because the user is not allowed to do certain actions. So that delta between these two is actually a really good way to think about how you should prioritize your tests, which is what are those things in particular that you can't do on the iPad? So you can't dump LSASS, right? So that's the thing. You can do that on the Windows computer in this case. So that's an area that we'd want to target. You can install things outside of the App Store on the iPad. So when you look at that on the MacBook, you say, well, the user is allowed to install things. What are the types of tests that I need to write and run continuously around execution of or installation of executables? And so when you start to think in those sort of ways, you start to build boxes or constraints around what you want to do. And then you can very quickly create a priority around what is important to you. Tests around installation of things, or people touching processes on the box. What are those deltas between secure devices, in quotes, and insecure devices?
I feel like it was kind of a trick question, because the perennial answer to that question wasn't an option, and it's always Windows, right?
Yeah, exactly. The safest possible option that you could get.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So and you've got some acronyms around this as well. So, part of my question, I was trying to queue up VSTs. So if you want to explain what the concept of verified security tests are, because I feel like that second part of my question, like tests that are, much more reliable, 100%, versus ones or ones that are focused on things that are more likely to happen. Help me understand. Maybe I don't fully understand the concept of verified security tests.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So in development in red teams and purple teams, you're used to building something called the TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Really, that refers to the procedure level. So if you look at the attack matrix, you've got tactics and techniques. And what you're doing as a red teamer or purple teamer is you're building procedures or implementations of those techniques. And that's how you approach things. And so you've got the structure of the attack framework itself, and that's kind of where the structure falls off. That's what you have, which means that as a purple teamer, if I want to write a security test that is on the attack matrix, I can write it in any language I want. I can write it in any format I want. That test has no constraints to it. The test I write could be wildly different from a test that somebody at another company or even within my own company writes. And so this is where it becomes a little bit of the wild, wild west in offensive security, where everybody's writing TTPs their own way with their own intentions. And in a lot of ways, they are not safe to run in production for those reasons. There's no way to validate them. And so that's common in command and control products, including our own Prelude Operator. When we were getting ready to release our current product, which is called Build, that product is designed around the concept of VST, Verified Security Test. We wanted to develop a structure that allows you to take the power of a TTP, validating defenses, and enable it to run in production. So the VST is really, if you want to think about it as a production-ready TTP, that's probably a pretty good way to think about it. And so a VST is a structured piece of code that contains a test function and a cleanup function. And the test function does an action in, take any of our examples like dumping LSS, and then the cleanup function will reverse any effects, if there were any, in the test function. Now, this VST goes through a very strict compiling process, testing process, and ultimately gets stored as a compiled file in your own file store just for you. And that file is now something that has kind of gone through all of your different safety checks, which include the efficacy of the file itself, the test, as well as how many system resources does this test use, how long does it take to run, and so forth. And then that test is now almost like a golden image of the behavior that you want to test against. That VST enables you to move your security testing outside of development environments or security environments, and allows you to run these tests that have never really run at production and scale on as many devices as you want. So if you want to understand whether you can, whether your defense can pick up a Office macro on 10,000 machines, you can run that single VST on all 10,000 and record which ones got it and which ones did not.
Yeah, you can definitely, scaling it up, I think it is a big thing. Even if you're only doing this testing on a portion of your computers, I feel like the value is huge here. And one of the things I always thought, I wonder if you get a lot of requests for this for customers or if you put these together for customers, but when we have a breach that gets in the headlines, inevitably somebody's going to ask, what would happen if we were hit with this thing that just happened to somebody else? And provided there's enough details, is that something you get a lot of requests for, like putting together like the chain of tests that would closely simulate, that headline breach?
Absolutely. This is where the rules actually come into place. So if you look at a lot of attacks out there, they can fall under different rules that are things that are known. So if a breach happens, yesterday or happened yesterday, and it is CVE ABC, right? Doesn't really matter the category, but you can look at that CVE and say, well, what are the behaviors of this CVE that make it unique? And then what rule does that CVE actually fall under? Could that be something related to ransomware? Well, do I have a rule that tests ransomware? Now, if you have a rule that's already testing ransomware, and that is a very comprehensive test, then that ransomware attack itself, even though the CVE is new, you have a comprehensive set of tests that you're already running. So it gives you the ability to have confidence in what your defense will actually respond like before that attack actually happens. Now, after you learn about the attack, you may see a variation in it that is unique, and you can write a new test implementation that closely mirrors what occurred there and add it to your collection of ransomware tests that you're running at whatever schedule.
Awesome stuff. I think that's all we have time for, but I did, before we wrap, want to mention that you do have a community edition of Prelude that people can download and try out for free and use for free. Anything else you want to mention there before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So Build itself, which is an IDE for writing verified security tests, that is a completely open source project. You find that on GitHub, of course, fully open source, and we're hoping that is actually a helpful thing to write teamers and purple teamers, pen testers, anybody that is involved in writing TTPs that is interested in trying to move them into production. We hope it helps the community.
Awesome stuff. David, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you very much.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk InfoSec culture and Mastodon with Jerry Bell.